us what is PCP?
PCP is the short name for phencyclidine, and it started out in the 40s and 50s of a drug used in general anesthesia to help with alleviation of pain, and then subsequent history.
And does phencyclidine or PCP have a street name?
Yeah, angel dust and other kinds of names.
Okay. And could you spell phencyclidine for the court reporter, please?
Phencyclidine.
Now, how did you go about investigating the effects of phencyclidine on the human brain and human behavior?
Well, the substance was familiar to me in the course of what I normally do professionally, because I normally do research in psychopharmacology, which is the effect of psychotropic drugs on the brain of humans. So I'm familiar with phencyclidine from that, and also because I have to teach drug abuse and medication effects to medical students in graduate school. But I also undertook a review of the peer-reviewed publications in the scientific literature.
Now, you said that in the 1950s, phencyclidine was available as a medication?
Yes, a medication used in general anesthesia to help with pain relief.
And could you, and at some point did that come to an end, the legal prescription of phencyclidine?
Yes, in 1965 it became illegal.
And could you trace for us the course of use and study of phencyclidine at a time when its use in humans was legal?
Yes, well, in the 50s, when it was used in anesthesia, it was found that many, if not most, individuals who had completed their surgery and were emerging from surgery, waking up after their operation, had bad reactions. They had delirium and hallucinations and things that looked like psychosis. There were then also some studies done in the late 50s and early 60s on both normal volunteers and patients with schizophrenia or psychosis, and it was found that the observations made in the surgical patients also held in many of the normal volunteers, that they had adverse reactions to phencyclidine that looked like psychosis or schizophrenia. When the drug was given to patients who already had schizophrenia, they got much worse. So as a result of that, the drug was then removed from the market in the mid-60s.
Since the mid-60s, what has its status been from a clinical standpoint?
Well, it's not allowed to be used in a legal sense for prescription to patients. It's become a substance of abuse. There may have been in the late 60s some very carefully controlled studies sponsored by the National Institutes of Health, but once you got into the 70s, there was no more clinical investigation with PCP.
And since that time, has it been used in other sorts of clinical studies, on animals, for instance?
It's been used in animal studies. And its effects on the chemistry of the brain have been studied in brains of animals and in pieces removed from human brain at autopsy, but it's not been used in clinical studies.
Now, has, in your opinion, to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, what causes these sorts of behaviors from the ingestion of PCP?
Well, it's known that the drug interacts with receptor sites or recognition points in the brain that are involved in the disease of schizophrenia. One of these is the so-called NMDA receptor. That's one receptor system. The other one is what's called the dopamine system. These are receptors which mediate some of the effects of schizophrenia. So the effects of this drug on the brain are consistent with what it's doing when it's administered to people or when people take it as a drug of abuse.
And what are the symptoms that you're referring to when you talk about the psychosis or schizophrenia-like symptoms?
Right. Well, when the drug produces these kinds of symptoms or syndromes in humans, there can be what we call negative symptoms in which people take on a trance-like state. They have difficulty in cognition and memory, and in so-called executive functioning, thinking, etc. But they can also have what we call positive symptoms. That means things like hallucinations, seeing or hearing things that aren't there, delusions. They can feel disconnected from their body. They feel that they feel no pain. And there can also be episodes of unpredictably occurring harm to others or harm to themselves.
And what is the mechanism that leads to that behavior from the use of PCP?
Yes, it's what we discussed with respect to its interaction on those receptors. So that is thought to be the mechanism of how these effects happen.
And what is the name of the receptor that you referred to?
There are two of them. The principal one is so-called NMDA receptor, and the second one is the dopamine receptor. And these are, again, recognition sites in the brain which mediate certain actions in humans.
Now, are there any physical manifestations of a person under the influence of PCP?
Yes, there can be many manifestations. Some of them can be what I talked about, like the trance-like state where people don't seem to be connected with themselves or with the environment. There can be some elevations in blood pressure. There can be sweating, tremulousness, shaking, and there may be people apparently reacting to hearing voices, etc.
And are there any physical manifestations that are observable to people that may be in their company?
There may be, but not necessarily. I mean, you may see agitation and tremulousness and sweating, etc., or you may see nothing. They may appear normal.
Now, are there studies about the duration of the effects of ingesting PCP?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, initially it was observed that the effects were confined to the period after ingestion, but then on further observation it was clear that the effects of the drug can be sustained for much longer periods of time, certainly 1 to 2 days after exposure, and in some cases effects of psychosis can persist long after that for weeks or even months. So the effect is not confined to the immediate period of exposure.
And are there any studies that document the effect of regular or chronic ingestion of PCP?
Yes.
What are those?
Well, the largest compiled set of data is a study published by the National Institute of Drug Abuse in 1978, and that puts together the experience from many sources on both acute and chronic exposure to PCP, what the dangers are, how you treat it, etc.
And do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty as to whether PCP ingestion can cause violent behavior?
Yes, I do.
What is that opinion?
I think it can cause violent behavior.
And what's the basis for that?
The basis is the combined experience from many sources on numerous individuals that have been treated or seen for abuse of PCP and the occurrence of violent behavior both to others and to themselves in those patients, together with what we know are the effects of the drug on the brain in a chemical sense.
And do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty as to whether such behavior can be unpredictable?
Yes, I do. It can be unpredictable.
And why is that?
That's just the nature of the disorder. It can be, people can appear normal sometimes and be aggressive and violent at other times, and you can't tell when the switch will happen or how often it will happen or to whom it will happen.
And do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty as to how well established is the causal connection between PCP use and episodes of violent behavior?
Yes, I feel that there is an established causal connection.
That's your opinion.
That's my opinion. I don't...
And what's the basis for that opinion?
Again, what I've put together from looking at the experience in a large number of individuals who have ingested PCP, which has been reported in the scientific literature, and also what is known about what the drug does to the brain.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Of course, there's a large body of literature, is there not, Doctor, that suggests that that's not true?
No, that's not the case.
That's not the case. Are you familiar with articles and books that make that point?
The point has been made, yes.
Okay, and it's just your opinion, you don't agree with it?
My opinion is that the preponderance of the evidence leads to the conclusion that I gave.
You don't agree?
I didn't say that.
Prior to being contacted in the fall of 2014, as you've indicated, exactly how many articles had you written on the effects of PCP, Doctor?
I don't know that I've written specifically on PCP, though you'll find some articles on treating drug abuse due to hallucinogens or bad trips or whatever.
I'm sorry?
Just what I said.
I'm sorry, I can't hear that.
Okay, maybe you could also repeat the question.
You said exactly how many articles had you written on PCP prior to being contacted in the fall of 2014 by defense counsel?
Yes, and the answer is I haven't specifically written an article on PCP, though I have written articles on the general topic of treating drug abuse in the emergency room.
And did any of those include clinical observations of people with PCP intoxication?
I don't recall.
No, correct?
I don't recall.
The answer is actually no. Isn't that true, Doctor?
The answer is I don't recall.
Okay. Could you tell me the article that you wrote that included clinical observations of treating a patient with PCP intoxication, please?
Well, you will find, I believe, in the 70s an article in the American Journal of Psychiatry called Drug Abuse in the Emergency Room Physician. I don't recall if that dealt with PCP or not, as I previously
We've had plenty of
testified.
opportunity to go back and review that article.
No, I
correct?
didn't review that article.
Okay. Now, you'd agree with me, would you not, Doctor, that the presence of PCP is not a necessary element for an incident of violence, true?
Correct.
And that the presence of PCP alone is not a precondition for an incident of violence. Isn't that true?
By that, do you mean can people commit violence without PCP?
No, what I'm suggesting, my question is, the fact that you have PCP alone does not indicate that a violent event will occur. Isn't that true, Doctor?
I'm trying to understand your question. Do you mean that people can commit violence without PCP?
No.
Yes.
What I'm suggesting in my question, Doctor, is the fact that a person is has PCP in their system, that alone does not indicate that there will be an incident of violence. Isn't that true?
Yeah, that you asked before. Yes, I agree with that.
So, as you've told us, you can't predict an act of violence from the presence, whatever it is, of PCP.
Yes, that's correct.
And in order to try to conclude that an act of violence occurred related to PCP, you'd have to know with some certainty whether or not there was PCP present, true?
Yes.
Whether or not there were other drugs being used, true?
Well, I'm not sure. In any given case, I'm not sure you can ever precisely predict what the outcome will be or what the role of PCP was.
Right. You'd actually have no idea whether or not PCP was related to an incident of violence unless you knew all of the other factors. Isn't that true?
Whether or not you knew the other factors. In any given case, you don't know.
Well, you don't know. And
That's right.
so, in fact, there are other drugs that are associated with incidents of violence, correct?
Other drugs in general, yes.
And alcohol is associated with incidents of violence, true?
Sometimes, yes.
And in fact, isn't it true that alcohol is actually the #1 intoxicant that is associated with incidents of violence?
That I don't know.
And that's because, in particular, alcohol reduces inhibitions to violence. Isn't that true?
It's known that alcohol reduces inhibitions, yes. The relation to violence, not entirely clear.
Given the fact that you had had no prior publishing in the area of PCP, could you tell us, please, Doctor, why it was indicated to you that you were asked to consider this question of PCP and violence?
Well, I've been doing psychopharmacology for 45 years, and substance abuse is one of the things that I teach and have done research on. But why I was actually asked, I can't
That was never
answer the
indicated
question.
to you.
Pardon me?
That was never indicated.
What
to you.
was never indicated?
Why you were being asked to provide testimony in regards to PCP and violence?
Not in so many words, no.
Well, in how many words was it
There
indicated to
was
you?
not in so many words. I was asked to testify, and my presumption is, although you'd have to ask the attorneys, is that I have been doing psychopharmacology for many decades.
Okay, and how many cases in psychopharmacology dealing with PCP have you done work prior to fall of 2014?
Well, when I was training in the inner city Boston hospitals and in the Bronx, there were cases of PCP abuse that I saw. But I have not specifically done research on PCP.
When was that, please?
The early 70s.
And so it's fair to say that you've had no clinical exposure to PCP, assuming that you had some back in the 70s, correct?
I have not treated patients with PCP abuse, correct?
And, well, PCP intoxication?
Any known relationship to PCP, I haven't dealt with that in a clinical sense since the early 70s.
And so when you now testify here today, that's on the basis of performing research after you were engaged by the defendant, is that correct?
No.
Now, you'd agree with me then, Doctor, that in order to, well, let me ask you this question. What else did you review besides the literature prior to your testimony here?
Well, as I've told you before, I teach psychopharmacology and have done so for many decades, and as part of what I do in my occupation, I have to know about drugs of abuse and their effects, and that includes PCP.
Okay. Did you review any factual circumstances related to this case?
No.
None. Would you recognize PCP intoxication, Doctor, if you saw it?
I expect I would.
Okay. Now, you'd agree with me, would you not, Doctor, that as you've indicated, that this sudden state of violence persists for some period of time?
It might or it might not.
Okay? And when you say it might not, what do you mean by that?
It might or might not persist for a period of time.
Okay, and how long a period of time would a sudden state of violence persist for, if you know?
It's unpredictable.
And it's unpredictable because you don't know, and therefore it's unpredictable to you, or it's unascertainable?
All I can say is it's unpredictable.
Meaning you don't know.
No, I didn't say that.
Okay, well, tell us, to the extent that you know, Doctor, how long does this sudden state of violence persist for?
It's unpredictable. It may be short, it may be long, you can't predict.
Okay, when you say long, what do you mean by that?
Extended period of time. I don't have a specific number in mind.
Okay, days?
I don't know.
Okay, well, it's in the literature, isn't it?
Not necessarily.
Okay,
It's
have you found it in the literature, Doctor?
What was your, I'm sorry, you're going kind of...
Have you found in the
Wait a sec
literature...
now, could you just ask the question and then let me answer, please?
Well, I asked you a question.
Well, go ahead and ask,
Okay,
please.
have you found in the literature the length of this state of violence and how long it persists?
Yes, and it's unpredictable.
Okay. Is it days, Doctor?
It could be, but I'm not sure.
And when you say you're not sure, it's not because it's not in the literature, you don't recall, is that correct?
No, it's because it's unpredictable.
And would you agree with me, it's more than minutes?
It may be minutes. Could be minutes.
Okay.
Could be short, could be long.
And describe these sudden states of violence as you know them, please.
I have not seen it, so I can't provide any witness to that effect.
Well, in your review of the literature, describe them for us, please.
People are said to have unpredictable, intermittent episodes of violent behavior, where they
Well, when you-
injure themselves or they injure others, or maybe they're just violent. It's unpredictable.
And you agree with me that, as you've described all of these potential behavioral manifestations of PCP, that is sort of the most rare of all of them, isn't that true?
No, I don't think so.
You don't agree with that?
No.
You wouldn't agree that the negative manifestations of psychosis is actually more common?
I can't say that that's true,
And you can't say that that's true because you don't know?
because I'm not sure it's known.
You'd agree with me, in fact, that part of the issue in discussing PCP and its relationship to violence is that because it is an illicit drug, it's not possible to study in human beings, true?
At the present, it's not possible to do a controlled trial in which the drug is deliberately administered to humans.
Right. But there has been research done since this NIDA study in the 1970s, as you've described it, isn't that correct?
To my knowledge, not in humans.
Well, based on information collected in emergency rooms and in police departments around the country.
There is experience with PCP as a drug of abuse, yes.
And you'd agree with me that that research is based in large part on not just, well, strike that question. If I could, Your Honor, could I go to Exhibit 150, please? Camera 3, 230 and more. Actually, I ask you to take a look at your monitor on your left there, Doc. Now, Doctor, have you ever seen this video before?
No,
Do you know who's depicted in that video?
no.
Okay. Do you know how long after the violent episode this video was taken?
No.
Okay. Do you see any evidence of PCP intoxication in that video?
I can't tell.
You can't tell?
Right,
And when you say you can't tell, why is that, doctor?
because there's not enough information.
Okay. Do you see any signs of intoxication in that video?
I can't tell if there is or isn't.
You just unwilling to express an opinion?
I didn't say that. I said I can't tell if there is or isn't.
What more information do you need, John?
A lot more information.
You need more information than that?
Yes.
Okay. Again, I'd ask you to take a look at the monitor on your left there, doctor. Now, having looked at that, have you ever seen that video before?
No.
See any evidence of PCP intoxication there?
I can't tell.
You see any evidence of PCP-induced psychosis there?
I can't tell.
You could tell, could you not, doctor, that there's no evidence of the positive aspects of psychosis in that video?
I cannot tell from that video.
Describe for us, please, then, doctor, what the positive aspects of psychosis are.
They include things like hallucinations, delusions, feeling disconnected from oneself, feelings of hostility or being persecuted, maybe violent or unpredictable behavior, talking to people that aren't there, etc.
Okay. So there are some that are sort of internal, correct? That may not have behavioral manifestations as you describe them, true?
There are things that are observable and things that are not necessarily observable.
Okay, so let's focus on the observable ones, doctor. Do you see any evidence of the positive, observable indications of psychosis in that particular video?
There's not enough information for me to tell one way or the other.
One of the characteristics of somebody in deep throes of the positive aspects of psychosis is they are purposeless in their conduct, isn't that correct?
That is one possibility, yes.
They are disorganized in their conduct, is that correct?
That is one possibility.
That their movement is uncontrolled?
That is a possibility, yes.
Okay, and those types of things you would expect to see associated with psychosis related to violence, isn't that true, doctor?
Not necessarily.
Okay, so you wouldn't, you would expect then to see somebody who's psychotic, unobservable, and yet somehow acting out in an extremely violent manner.
That I didn't say, but the point is that the aggressive, violent behavior is unpredictable.
Okay, did you see any aggressive or violent behavior in that video?
I can't really tell what their behavior was. I only saw people walking from the car.
Okay. Well, let me ask, well, that's fine. Nothing further. Thank you, Doc.
Nothing
You may
further.
sit down.
Thank you.
Right this way, please.
Ms. Maverick, I hear you on your motion to eliminate, to exclude.
Your Honor, essentially what the defendant is suggesting to the court is that through Dr. Greenblatt, the defendant is entitled to put in essentially propensity evidence, because it is evidence of character, bad character. I think that is, I think, unquestionable, Your Honor. What he's suggesting is that a class of people, i.e. PCP users, have manifestations of bad character, i.e. violence. And that is nothing more than propensity evidence in our law, Your Honor. The defendant, as we know, is subject to the same restraints as the Commonwealth is on the introduction of bad character evidence, is that it is not admissible to show that somebody acted in conformance with their bad character. And that's exactly what the defendant is attempting to do in the use of Dr. Greenblatt's testimony. And what the defendant suggests is he's entitled to do that because it's third-party culprit evidence. But the suggestion that it is third-party culprit evidence doesn't answer the question, Your Honor. That there are a number of cases. There's a fairly recent case, Commonwealth versus Smith, that really follows the whole line of and reaffirms the whole line of third-party culprit cases in the Commonwealth. You can't adduce evidence that is speculative. And the doctor's testimony here, Your Honor, shows exactly the speculative nature of the proffered evidence. That is, there is no basis. He has no opinion. He has an opinion about PCP, but that it can be related to violence, but he has no, and there are no facts that are relevant here. We have video minutes after the violent episode, and the doctor can't say one way or the other. Either he can't or he's unwilling, one of the two. He can't say that there's any manifestation of psychosis at all, and I think it defies logic to suggest that there's a switch, and it's not consistent with his testimony. In fact, what his testimony is that it can't be predicted. PCP is neither a necessary predicate or its presence a necessary end state that violence will occur. Alcohol, there are a million other things. So just because the defendant suggests that there's scant evidence of PCP here, that he's entitled to put in that a person used PCP and therefore acted violently, I'm suggesting to the court that's pure speculation. It is in violation of the prohibition against bad character evidence. It does not conform to third-party culprit evidence. It is prejudicial. Its probative value is de minimis, Your Honor, and I'm suggesting even in balancing, even if the court was inclined to consider it under that rubric, that on balance, the prejudicial effect versus the probative value, it should be excluded.
Your Honor, we laid out in...
I object. Mr. Rankin is the proponent of the evidence.
One of them gets to argue, but I don't care which one. As long as we don't have more than two people arguing, as long as Mr. Rankin isn't going to follow you up with additional argument, it doesn't matter which one.
Thank you, Your Honor. It'll just be me. Thank you. Okay. Your Honor, we filed late last week a memorandum which I think sets forth really the two distinct bodies of law that I think are implicated by Dr. Greenblatt's testimony. The first was alluded to, they've actually both been alluded to by the prosecutor. The first is third-party culprit evidence. And it's well settled that the defendant has a right to present a complete defense as a constitutional right. And the opportunity to present third-party culprit evidence is of constitutional dimension. And as the SJC said in the seminal Silva-Santiago case, if the evidence is of substantial probative value and will not tend to prejudice or confuse, all doubt should be resolved in favor of admissibility. And that's because it is of constitutional dimension and essentially precluding a defendant from presenting a defense before the jury obviously undercuts his constitutional right to present a defense. The second body of law, which is relevant here, Your Honor, is that there are times, I think this is one of them, where the admissibility of expert testimony, for example, depends upon a predicate or conditional fact. If there were not evidence in this case which would permit a reasonable jury to infer by a preponderance of the evidence that individuals, namely Ortiz and Wallace, were on PCP on the night in question, then Dr. Greenblatt's testimony would not be relevant and it would not be admissible. But, Your Honor, based on the testimony of Jennifer Mercado, and I should point out, Your Honor, it was the Commonwealth that elicited initially her testimony about PCP, not the defense. And it was the Commonwealth who not only elicited her testimony about that evening, but showed her a video of Ortiz and Wallace arriving at Hernandez's home around midnight, and her testimony about that video, her testimony about personally observing Ortiz and Wallace on PCP and the and how and behavior, Wallace's behavior while on PCP, her personal observations about their sweatiness and jitteriness when they were on PCP, and what she observed that night when they left Connecticut. That is more than enough, Your Honor, to meet the standard that's required for a conditional fact. And, you know, Mr. Bomberg says it's scant evidence. Well, that's for the jury to determine. And as the court, the SJC said in Bright, which I think is an extremely instructive case on this whole area, what the SJC said in Bright is that, find it, Your Honor, a jury would naturally disregard evidence they found not to be relevant to the case based on the determination of a predicate fact, which is why, again, why any doubt should be resolved in favor of admissibility. In other words, if the jury doesn't buy what Jennifer Mercado said, and they think she's all wet, then they're not going to pay any attention to Dr. Greenblatt either. So we have done enough to establish the predicate fact. It's in the case. It's up to the jury to decide whether or not to believe that predicate fact. And if they do find that predicate fact by preponderance of the evidence, clearly Dr. Greenblatt's testimony is highly relevant. Your Honor, this is not propensity evidence. This is scientific evidence about the effects of this particular drug. And we're not talking about PCP use in general. We're talking about the early morning of June 17th, 2013. It is up to the jury to decide what weight, if any, to give to Dr. Greenblatt's testimony. But, Your Honor, it's not even close with respect to the balance, and it would be a violation of Mr. Hernandez's constitutional rights to preclude this testimony, and I ask the court to allow it.
To the extent that the Commonwealth raised this issue, that was in redirect examination, Your Honor, and in fact, Dr. Greenblatt's testimony is general. He has no specific relationship of PCP to this particular night, and that's what it is. It's generalized testimony that has no relationship to any fact.
I'm not sure it's relevant and I certainly don't believe it's controlling as to who raised it, but the transcript that was supplied shows that the issue of drugs and PCP in particular was on direct, pages 16 to 22 before the cross. The admission of expert testimony rests in the broad discretion of the court. The test for relevance is whether the proffered testimony will assist the trier of fact in understanding the evidence or determining a factual issue in this case. Clearly, expert testimony that doesn't relate to any issue in the case is not relevant and, as a matter of law, not helpful expert testimony. The court recognizes that expert testimony should not be admitted unless the subject of the testimony is one on which the jurors would need assistance. It's not a matter of common knowledge and can be helped by that testimony. I do not find any support for the proposition that this type of evidence is propensity evidence. No case suggesting that or holding that has been brought to the court's attention. There are numerous cases all across the country where this type of evidence has been allowed. There's a California case where a psychiatrist testified that the effects of PCP are widely variable and unpredictable, and that it's common for people under the influence of PCP to have impaired judgment. There's another California case where a psychopharmacologist testified that PCP causes a user to respond from the limbic system, which causes a person to act like an animal and to respond combatively, assaultively, aggressively, and violently without thinking and without using the higher cortical centers where rules of conduct and, is considered. There is New York case where in reducing a verdict to manslaughter, the court noted that a doctor had testified as a defense expert that PCP may make someone violent. The context there was whether the victim may have been violent. There is a D.C. case where, in support of a motion for new trial, a recognized pharmacology expert testified that the effects of PCP can last 2 to 3 days, and PCP can cause aggressive and combative behavior, and the court found trial counsel ineffective for failing to consult with such an expert about the possible effects of PCP on the victim's ability on the effects of PCP because the average juror would not understand the general effects of PCP without assistance. There's another D.C. case where the defendant had attempted to have a forensic pharmacologist testify that PCP impairs the ability to perceive reality, and on appeal it was deemed error to have excluded testimony of experts simply because they could not testify as to the actual effects of PCP on the specific person involved in that case. They were going to testify, as in this case, on general impact. The court noted that observations of the individual who allegedly used drugs is not a prerequisite for expert testimony, and that the proposed testimony would have assisted the jury in evaluating the victim's credibility in her account of the assault. There is a Michigan case where a psychiatrist testified that PCP can affect the ability to control violent impulses, the kind of testimony that the defense is seeking to have here. General testimony on the effects of PCP has been accepted throughout and in many, many, many courts in the United States. There's been no suggestion in any of those cases that presenting such testimony falls within the parameters of propensity evidence, and the court finds that it does not. Further find the testimony is relevant because the predicate has been shown by preponderance of the evidence. I do not find that it is more prejudicial than probative. To the extent that the Commonwealth made other arguments in its memo of law, such as that the defendant should not be allowed to introduce circumstantial evidence, should not be allowed to ask the jury to draw inferences because the defendant has the opportunity to take the stand and testify as to what happened. The court rejects that argument in its entirety. The defendant has not sought to ask, and certainly would not be allowed to ask, whether this witness has an opinion as to whether someone other than the defendant murdered Mr. Lloyd, or is not going to be asked whether this witness has an opinion, giving a hypothetical of what Ms. Mercado testified to, whether this witness has an opinion that given that either Mr. Wallace or Mr. Ortiz engaged in a sudden act of violence. The motion in limine to exclude the testimony is denied. The court officers wanted a sense as to what time you think we're going to finish up today, just in terms of the logistics that they arranged.
Your Honor, we have 3 witnesses to call. I want to make sure the third one is here, but I think he will be. Dr. Greenblatt, Mr. Carita, who swabbed the bubble gum, and Ms. Smith from Selmark in Texas, who tested the bubble gum. I have no idea how long the Commonwealth will be on cross, but I think we should be done by lunchtime, would be my
That was really the issue, is whether we should order lunches, but we'll have a better sense at 11 o'clock.
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you. Let's bring the jurors down.